What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here today. It's been a while. Today is going to be a little different. I'm going to do basically like a first thoughts and then more revealing revelations basically of actually playing last card Revonn. And so a lot of new support came out in the form of Team Dragon's Vanity. And so I'm very excited to play that and actually get a chance to just play test in standard with Revonn. Premium is a little questionable, but standard is the way to go for Revonn. And I just will mention some of the cards and also at the end basically just talk about that, seeing some of the builds that people have been playing and actually have seen some kind of results and kind of go from there. So anyway, with Lost Card Revonn, he has two skills. So the first skill is basically when he attacks, if there are 5 or more rested rear guards, he can get an extra 15k and a drive. And then if you have a grade 3 in the soul, you can actually get a critical. And so that's pretty powerful, pretty free at first. You know, you're like, there's no counter blast, there's no discard, there's no soul blast, all that kind of stuff. But you are required to have 5 or more rested rear guards. And at first, it's just like, what? That's a lot, right? And this is like before Galea's, Huevos, and Narissa's support reveal. So it's just like having these first thoughts like, why are we recommending a big board just to get an extra drive check and an extra power up? And then if we have the grade 3, basically we either soul charge or we rode our grade 3 a second time. Is it really worth it? And at first it's just like, okay, let's not prejudge this. Let's see the support and see how it comes. But its second skill is also worth mentioning. And the second skill is basically you rest one of your rear guards and you minus 5k your opponent's vanguard for the turn. And so if they were at 13k base vanguard like Force, they're down to 8k, and then anything lower than that just incremental lower than that. And that was like, whoa. That means even my grade 1s that don't even have power ups, like an 8k base grade 1, can actually hit. And I was like, what? That's crazy. And then if I could throw down a V title, it's poke poke with 9k 9k. I don't even have to put them in Excel circle. So it leaves plays to do and abuse that, because if your opponent starting off negative already, they have to drop more guard with each attack, especially if they're not getting any damage triggers or they're already at 5. And then you just like, you can't take any of these. So you're taking all of it. However, it's just combining that. It's like 5 or more rested rear guards. You need something to restand at the end of that battle or something, or just need to play some formation with the Excel circle so you have enough room to drop a lot of rear guards, but at the same time you're committing. And so those are those first thoughts where you're just like, it's good and not good, because it's like, okay, Bushiro maybe is trying to find a balance. But then we started seeing some other support, and so we'll take a U-turn on Revonn once I talk about more of the other support. And so one of them is Narissa, which is the grade 1, and honestly, she's really good. So if she is rested by another card effect, hint hint, Revonn, you can Soul Blast one, restand her, and give it 10k for the turn. And it's not a once per turn, so if you rest it with other units, there are units that can rest too now in that set, and so you can make that Narissa really big. But ideally is that you just want it for the Revonn, so you can just have all the units that you can use to actually attack. It's an 18k attacker or an 18k booster. And so one of the things that I like is that there are cards you could form certain columns where you can actually hit, and they even though they got a trigger, let's say they're at 8k base now and they got a 10k trigger, they're at 18. So as long as you can form your formations, you can still hit. And Narissa is just one of those one cards you could just depend on. Even if they hit a trigger, you can still hit, which is very good. And so with that, the other skill she has is also very key. And so basically, at the end of the turn, if there are 4 more rested rear guards, she can actually go into Soul and draw you a card. So it's very similar to Coral Soul. And the timing is a little important too. So if you have both Narissa and Coral Assaults, make sure you do the Narissas first, because they look for 4 or more rested rear guards. I think she counts herself, so that's a little easy to deal with. And then do her skill, get the draw, and then Coral Soul just cared if you did 4 battles or more. So that way he can go into the Soul and draw you a card as well. And so it's another card that Revonn can use for his minus 5k skill and the 5 or more rearguard skill requirement, and at the same time still maintain some advantage back from your field to your hand, essentially. And yes, you're getting the extra drive check, but you're committing board just to get an extra drive check. And so if you can get some of those pieces back, right, in the form of any advantage, then it's much very appreciated, right? And so that's very key. It's very helpful and everything. And so with kind of coming up with that is the grade 2s. We got Galeas, the retrain. We got Huevos, the retrain. Very excited for these units. Their skills are interestingly locked behind a certain criteria. And so Galeas basically says when your Vanguard attacks, And if it's a grade 3, specifically grade 3, so it can't be like a stride or anything, and your opponent's um, attack or its base power is different from what it is, the original, you can counterblast one and restand Galeas essentially. Fuegos has a very similar wording. Same thing, grade 3 when it attacks and your opponent's Vanguard is a different power, it can stand, but this time it's a discard. So Fuegos is just a discard to restand. Galeas is a counterblast to restand, and ultimately you want to use Galeas most of the time because you don't want to be discarding your resources that you could be using for next turn, you can be using for defensive purposes. The counterblast is, it's really, to be honest, with practice, it's one of the few cards that actually use counterblast, so it's okay to save those counterblasts for Galeas. The one thing that makes Galeas a little even more reliable is that he has a second skill, and so that's when he attacks, and there are 4 more rested rear guards. He counts himself as well. He gets an additional 5k. It's a continuous effect, and so if you put him in an Excel circle, he's 19k. Well, Excel 2 circle. Or if he's by himself on a regular circle, he's 14k base by himself. And so if you put him in a Excel 2 circle, 19k can still hit a Vanguard that got a trigger after the minus 5k and all that kind of stuff. So that's still actually pretty good. And then you get to benefit on restanding that guy as Revonn attacks. And so you can still follow up with that. And so that way your triggers can actually go into Galeos or any remaining standing units or other units that restand as well. Because you can have multiple Galeos, you can have Fuegos and such and such. So there are options. You can actually attack after your Vanguard attacks, which means you can disperse the triggers to make the best out of them, like criticals, heals, draws, and even some people are playing fronts and all that kind of stuff. So you can still utilize that. And so if you see most builds, they're playing for Galeos. It's definitely a staple for Revonn for sure. It helps a lot with that battle formation, right? Because it looks for rested rear guards, but then it restands itself, so that way you still get an attack. So Galeos is really good. That's what I'm saying. And the Fuegos, his other skill is basically when he's called Soul Blast 1. If you have a Revonn Vanguard, he actually looks for Revonn in the name, which is like whoa. And you can Soul Blast 1, call the top card in your hand, and call it. And you rest Fuegos in the process, so you can +1 and kind of help build up a board, kind of help that Revonn turn where it's like, I need rested rear guards, I don't care what they are, let me use Fuegos to rest himself and call something else, and then kind of go from there. It helps against like matchups like the Norakami matchup. I know Cardfight King, he did a profile recently with Last Card Revonn. He mentioned like that card was actually helpful against Norakami and any removal that you have to like deal with, right? And so if you got a card that could become a 2-card kind of thing, then that helps a lot, right? And one of the things that I noticed right off the bat, I didn't want to see Fuegos right away. So I'm not playing him at 4, and some of the builds that I've seen are playing at 4, some are playing at 1 or 2 or none. It's all over the place, to be honest. And I think Fuegos is still needed, and it might be worth having 2 or 3 copies in the deck. Just depends on your meta game. If you see like a lot of Norakami or any removal in general, probably 3 cards would be the best. Maybe 4 if you really think you need it that badly. But if you're gonna see not as much and it's just different meta game that you want to count for different matchups, then maybe just 2 or 1, or if you cut it, then you cut it. So there are other grade 2s in Vanguard that we can use. So just play around, tweak it, and go from there, right? And so one of the things I want to say about premium for these 2 cards, they're locked behind grade 3. So I can't stride, let's say Blue Wave, like Valeos or Angerboy or premium decks. I can't use those V-Train cards on the strike turns, which sucks because it's like Flood Hazard and Tetra Boil Dragon are so good in their abilities that they can actually just end the game, and it's just like I wish the rechange just work with them. But a side note is basically this still works with legions. So, and there are a few legions in Aqua Force. The most notable one is obviously Ripples. So you can get creative with those turns, and you still have to work with the difference in power check. And so I haven't talked about it, but basically you can actually call on Fort Fessel, and that kind of segues into it. So let me pause there and go back to it. Another card that we got support that is seeing usage or none at all, it's either end of the spectrum really, is Fort Vessel Dragon. And so it's on place Vanguard, Counterblast, your opponent loses 5k for the turn, Vanguard. Similar skill to Vanguard, Revonn, but the difference is it's a Counterblast instead of just resting a rear guard. It's an on-play skill, which is good for premium if you want to use it that way. But what I was going with that is that you can do this in a Ripple build where you ride the Fort Vessel, Counterblast, reduce them to 5, use the Odyssey as grade 1, and actually fix your Vanguard into the Ripple Legion and then perform Legion. So that way you can actually use even Galeas, you can even use Huevos to actually restand because they just care about the grade 3 and the power difference. And there, you meet it there. Is it really worth playing? I have no idea. I haven't really tested it out. But the theory is there and it actually works if you play it. Now it's just assessing, is it really worth it though? But anyway, in Fourth Vessel, what I was saying is that it's either seen play or not play. Primarily because it's like, do you really want to ride that card? Not really. You'd rather have Revonn. So some players have just cut it out completely. And they're playing 4 grade 3s. And it's just like, how do you play 4 grade 3s? And that segues into the next grade 1, which is really good. And it honestly can be splashed in any Aqua Force deck. And that is the new Barragios V-Train. It's basically on place, check the top 5 for a grade 3, and if you add it to hand, you can discard a card. And so it helps fetch for your grade 3s. You can do it in different ends of the spectrum. If you're playing the 4 grade 3 Revonn build, it can help on hitting the Revonn before you actually write to grade 3, so you could actually write him. The other side of the spectrum is that if you play multiple grade 3s, it could be anywhere. It could be like 7 grade 3s, 11 grade 3s in premium builds. Whatever you play, it helps constantly filter. Right, and if you got cards that bounce back or anything like that, you can kind of like reuse it. But I don't think at the moment we have. I know that Numatama and Bermuda does that, but point is, it's on place. You can do the skill, and as long as you keep doing it, especially throughout your game, you're filtering cards. You're grabbing grade 3s out of your deck, which can be used for stride fodder, PG cost fodder. It can be a rearguard base like Riptide. So in premium, we can actually search for Riptide, which is really good. We can even splash in cards like a mixture of things like the Thava's Supreme Ruler. If you want to use that as a rearguard restanding. If you want to search for Valeos or Anger Boyo in a blue wave premium deck, you can. So, you can really mix your grade 3 ratios to start being able to have more control which grade 3 you ride. And at the same time, you're filtering. And so your drive tracks are going to look really good, especially when you have turns that you do more than 3 drive checks, especially on a stride. So if you're doing like a restanding turn, you're going to get 4 checks with Tetra Boy, and you can get 5 with Flood Hazard, for example. Or just in general, making your Vanguard attacks a little more scary, especially if you play like a crit-based deck. And you could just stack that on a Riptide, in the Riptide premium deck profile. You can stack it on the Riptide, so Riptide can restand through to Orpheus skill or Andre skill and all that kind of stuff. So you can really abuse it. Barragio just has so much goodness, so much usefulness in different decks. Highly recommend that guy. And he's an 8K base. And that's just one skill. His other skill is that when he has a continuous effect where if there's 4 or more rested rear guards and he counts himself, he gets +5. So he's a 13K attacker or booster. And so one of the things that I've gone with back to Revonn now is that when you make your battle formations, you have Narissa, you have Galeas, you have Coral Assaults, you have Barragios, you have all these cards that are from the new set, even a Fort Vessel here and there. You can make your formations really effective. And one of the things that I do is actually have Barragios behind the Vanguard. And so Revonn already gets 15K, and he's 3 drive checks. So if you add that with the Barragios power up, he becomes 40K with triple drive in standard. Your opponent has to commit some cards to actually guard it. And if they PG it or anything like that, then you just put the triggers on the rear guard, and they have to deal with the rear guard at the time. So you have this constant pressure from the Vanguard where it's like, I'm triple drive, I'm big, I can rip a trigger because of Barragio's filtering and other cards that can filter like Nicolas for Algos. It's just nasty. It's really good though. So definitely recommend for that build. And as I said, at first thoughts, Revonn seemed a lot more committed. Like you have to put a lot to get something out of it. But with all these cards playing it, I realized that you can return some of that advantage back. You can really get some more bang for your buck, right? You can just do a good amount and still maintain resources and just keep going until you beat your opponent. Especially once you get the crit, your opponent has to guard the Vanguard after that no matter what. Otherwise, they're going to take 2 crit at a minimum. And if you drive crits and you're triple drive, then you're going to be higher. Whew. But anyway, that was a lot of talking. But yeah, all these units are really good. My first thoughts at first with Revonn were a little iffy, and I think most people were. But as we saw more and more of the cards being revealed, we're like, okay, this can actually work. And now with seeing some results, people are playing different builds. So I mentioned the 4 grade 3 Revonn build. Cardfight King just did an actual deck profile right now. He's seen success recently, and he talks about it a little more in depth why. And he went through the same concern that most people do. We usually play higher counts of grade threes, and he explained that he himself was a little hesitant at first, but he tried it out and it worked out for him, and he explains why it worked out for him. The other side of the spectrum, you played some Fort Vessels in there and some other units that some people have thrown in. It's not really consistent in what units they use, but the one that I've seen the most is Fort Vessel. I played 3 Fort Vessels and 4 Revonn, so I have 7 grade 3s. And so my theory behind it is that using Nicholas and Algos, I'm filtering there. With Baragios, I'm also filtering there so I can get the correct grade 3. And if I just get a Fort Vessel and I don't need it, I can just discard it. And it's one card that is not a trigger out of my deck, and now I can actually put triggers on the stuff that I want and be okay. And in standard, you really don't care having grade 3s in your hand unless you intend to ride them just to get an Excel circle. But you can discard it, and because it's not really shield, right? And so you just discard it, and now you got useful units that are worth shield, worth potential triggers, and such left in your deck. And so it makes your turns more scarier. It can mean the difference. So I focus on a more filtering build. And there's some people that don't play crits at all. They're playing a more draw front trigger base decks. I honestly haven't tried it, and with my experience and even some of the other experience with other Aqua Force players, is that you really need like your Vanguard and 2 other units at a minimum to really get the worth of a front trigger. And at times, sometimes you still wish you had the crit. Of course, if you have a bigger field and you get a front trigger, it's the nuts, right? And not saying front triggers are bad, but I'm just saying Revonn is probably one of the last few attacks that he's going to attack with, right? And your other rear guards that restand like Galeas and Fuevos are really your saving grace to still have attacks after that, making that front trigger useful. And so just keep in mind that, and I'm not saying that front triggers are bad, but just keep in mind that's something that you have to deal with. And if you're not playing any crits anymore, you lose crit pressure too. So it's pros and cons kind of thing, really. So for me, I definitely promote the more crit based build. I think the 8 crit 4 draw build is pretty good right now. Especially some decks are more aggressive right now, so you value the crit pressure, and of course, crits are 15k shields, which is something you can just drop 1 card and go from there. So anyway, I've been talking a lot. I hope you guys enjoy this kind of stuff. I like just talking about my thoughts about this. I hope it was useful, hope it was insightful, hope it was relatable, right? When we first saw that reveal. And then in the future, I am getting my cards that are from the set coming in the mail still. So once I have all the cards, I do intend to make that deck profile. You can see some of the CFA playtesting that I did on recently. I've changed the deck list a little bit since then, and I'll mention some of the cards that I've tried and some of the things that I've noticed, and do a comparison too with Cardfight King's deck profile. So I will provide a link for his deck profile. Please check out his content. It's really good Aqua Force content if you like that. And again, Force of the Ocean blog is still out there. There hasn't been any activity yet, but I do plan on running an article, and that might take a little time, but just keep it on the lookout, and I'll put the link below there. All right? See ya, amigos. Have a good one. Bye.